WHOW 75th anniversary video at 7:30 that night. The evening includes entertainment by country singer Gracia Harrison and a delicious plated pork chop meal with all the trimmings. There'll even be a special WHOW 75th anniversary cake to enjoy. This special night will be a fundraiser with all proceeds going to the Neighborhood Care Center No Fee Grocery and the Clinton High School Student Activity Fund. Tickets are $50 each or buy a table of 8 for $360. Tickets can be purchased at the Clinton High School office during school day business hours. Help WHOW raise money for these two special causes and watch the debut of the WHOW 75th anniversary video Saturday, November 12th at the Clinton Country Club. Get your tickets now.
Your friend in Central Illinois, WHOW.
Top of the morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHOW Morning Show is streaming to Facebook and YouTube, brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton. My guest on the phone today is Mrs. Cheryl Warner. She is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. Good morning, Mrs. Warner. How are you today?
Good morning, Seth. We are doing great. It's a great Friday here in Warrensburg-Latham, and looking forward to all of the Halloween festivities that will occur on Monday. The kids are very excited.
No doubt. Yeah, my youngest came out of school yesterday, excited that she gets to wear her Halloween costume to school on Monday. So everybody, I think, looks forward to that for sure. And Mrs. Warner, as we talk here this morning, I know just earlier this week, and maybe even yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, state report cards came out. And you were telling me off the air, we haven't had these for a few years with COVID and all of that. So how about the report cards, and talk to me just a little bit about what you saw in there. What stood out to you?
So, right, we haven't had school report cards basically since 2019 because of the pandemic, when the state basically suspended state testing for a period of time, and there simply just was not enough data to generate the school report card. But coming back in 2022, the state has recalculated the formulas and data developed in the state report card, and this will be the first year since 2019 that school districts have what they consider summative designations again. There are 4 different designations that schools can receive: exemplary, commendable, targeted, and comprehensive. Exemplary being the schools that are basically in the top 5% of the state. Comprehensive being the schools that are in the lowest 5% of the state that need comprehensive reform, and are also given funds and requirements to meet that reform. So, of course, with this new summative designation and a new formula for this being created, I would say probably caused some anxiety for schools, considering we have not been in this process for 2 years. And we were all a little concerned about state testing results last year after a learning loss and results from pandemic. I will tell you, our district is very, very excited and happy about our results. Our elementary building actually was rated as exemplary, and our middle school and high school were rated as commendable, and we could not ask for better. It basically tells us that all of our efforts the last couple of years have paid off, and students are making gains like they should.
Sure. Well, when it comes to those designations, Mrs. Warner, do they each come with a course of action? The commendable piece. I mean, to get to that next level, do you have to do anything there? What's kind of when you get these designations? What does that mean for adjustment, for improvements? How about those things?
Right, great question. So just because you have an exemplary rating or a commendable rating, which is very good, you always need to be looking at how do you keep that or how do you improve, right? So our building principals are actually in the process right now of meeting with an ROE consultant who is coming in and meeting with the principals and leadership teams, and they are doing basically a deep dive into all of the data that creates this summative designation. So they will be determining what were the strengths in all of the data aspects that created the summative designation, and then what are the areas that could potentially be at risk that they need to look at in the future to continue to increase. So let me just give you an example. High school designations look a little bit different than elementary schools, right? Because high schools have different types of data. So for example, graduation rate is a portion of that. Ninth graders on track. truancy, those types of things, college and career readiness guidelines. So they will be looking at some different indicators and looking, okay, are we falling short in maybe some of the college career readiness guidelines? Are we falling short with freshmen in algebra classes? What are the areas that we need to continue to target to either keep our commendable and move on to that exemplary to make sure that our students are still showing growth?
Sure.
Here's the kicker, though. The state will continue to raise those benchmarks every year. So, as usual, it's hard. It gets harder to meet those from year to year, of course, especially when you go back to the IAR test and the SAT test, weighing heavily on those designations. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and when it comes to those for lack of a better term, the goalposts being moved, how much more difficult does that become down the road? If the margin of error becomes that much slimmer.
It does become very difficult. So the state did just put out what their future projections are, and don't quote me on this, but I think if I'm recalling correctly, and I don't have that chart in front of me, but I believe by the year 2032, they were predicting that over 95% of students all needed to be on grade level or above. That is a tremendous target. And when we say all students, that includes students with IEPs in special education, that includes students of all ethnicity, that includes all students that might qualify for free reduced. So we're talking about students that have a wealth of obstacles, not only in their learning and their home life. So to try to basically reach that target for every single population, when there's quite a bit of disparity in achievement of those populations, is tremendously difficult. English language learners would be one of those as well. So you're right, the goalpost keeps moving and it gets harder. And I I wouldn't be surprised if the whole system actually changes before we get to the year 2032.
Again, right?
That's just kind of what we see.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything just keeps on changing. Sure. Well, and Mrs. Warner, again, our guest on the phone today, Mrs. Cheryl Warner, is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. How about academic progress? And just, you mentioned that there was some concern about, what would we find as we came out of COVID? And for at least Warrensburg-Latham schools, things seem to be trending in the right direction. So how about academic progress? What comes to mind there?
Right, they are trending in the right direction. And again, those summative designations are a good kind of check mark of how we've been doing. But I will tell you what we value most as a district really is our local data, our assessments that we are completing with students on a regular basis, not a state test that occurs one time a year. We happen to use a K-12 program called IXL for both English language arts and math. What data tells us is that we should see students, if they're on track for making progress in grade level or above, that they should gain 10 points a month in this program. Our principals actually just reviewed their beginning of the year data at our board meeting this week, and they are reporting that our students are seeing double that amount of growth, or sometimes even up to 40 points per month. So that's fantastic. Basically, again, it tells us that what we're doing is working. All of the time and effort and dedication that the parents, students, and teachers are putting into those interventions and enrichment experiences are paying off, and students are making great growth.
Love to see that as well. Mrs. Warner, as it relates to the school report card, anything else that stands out to you as it relates to your school district, academic progress, anything there you want to talk about?
I think something that all districts are going to be looking at and all buildings are going to be looking at is trying to increase their attendance rates. The last 2 years, that became a struggle when we had to transition into e-learning or remote learning. And when we basically, as districts within the state of Illinois, were told that we had to offer e-learning, that it had to be an option for families, whether that was for health-related reasons or even just as an option for choice, it did drastically change attendance rates for schools across the state. And that is something that I think we are all still working very hard on and trying to make sure that students are coming back to us, that They have regularly based attendance, that we're contacting parents, that we're using our truancy officers, that we're using all the resources to make sure that they have that consistent attendance and that they are never missing more than 5% of the days throughout a school year. And I feel like all districts are still building that again.
Well, and that's one thing, I mean, it particularly bigger districts, not so much, school districts like Warrensburg-Latham or Clinton or Maroa, smaller communities with smaller districts in central Illinois. But just in general, that's one thing out of the pandemic is student losses, students that have just kind of fallen off the map. And like I said, it's more bigger districts that you're seeing it in, but it's interesting to hear kind of your perspective, Mrs. Warner, on how that plays itself out in your district.
Well, and we have seen an increase in homeschooling as well across the board in the state, and I would say every district. That can be concerning. Homeschooling can be done very effectively in some households, and sometimes homeschooling is not schooling. So what we have seen a pattern of this year, students coming back to us, whether it's from another district or from our own, that basically had a year of what they targeted as homeschooling last year. And unfortunately, they're coming back and they're not on grade level.
Right.
So we're having to make some pretty difficult decisions along with parents and decide what's best for that student. And yes, I definitely think that the pandemic contributed to that increase that we see in families that took an option to school at home.
But that's got to be a small percentage of students, right?
It is a pretty small percentage, but it is so impactful for those students when you think about possibly losing an entire academic year.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What do you said difficult decisions? Just kind of blankets. What does that kind of entail? Is it holding them back a grade level and making them retake like first, second grade, whatever it may be? What are some measures that you take in those circumstances?
You hit it right on the head. Basically, if we're looking at an early elementary child and they're coming in and let's say that they are first grade age, but there are no reading skills or even basic beginning skills of letter recognition, we may have to make a decision. Is it best to place that student in kindergarten or is it best to place that student in first grade? And that really does need to be a collective decision with school administration and also the family, and keeping in mind what are the social emotional impacts of any decision that occurs that way too.
Very good. Well, Mrs. Warner, again, anything on school report card we didn't touch on, you want to put out there for us?
I don't think so. I just want to put a shout out to all of the teachers and parents and students in my district for working so hard. They should be very proud.
Sure.
They absolutely should. So
Mrs. Cheryl Warner is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. My guest on the phone this more to come with her here on the WHOW Morning Show.
WHOW.
DeWittDailyNews.com is the area's leading local news source 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Get the latest local news, obituaries, police blotter, weather forecast, and more with no paywall. Head to DeWittDailyNews.com to get the local information you need to know.
For the latest in Central Illinois agricultural news, visit IllinoisFarmRadio.com. Get updated information on markets, weather, ag news, local interviews with NAFB farm broadcaster Jared White, and much, much more. All at IllinoisFarmRadio.com.
Most of us don't expect to see children on the street on a dark night. Country insurance agent Buddy Wilson in Clinton reminds you that on Halloween, the little goblins and ghosts can appear unexpectedly, so watch for them. In the Halloween excitement, they may forget to watch for you. Join country insurance agent Buddy Wilson in Clinton in driving with extra care this Halloween. Warner Hospital in Clinton sends best wishes for a happy, safe Halloween and reminds boys and girls to be sure to stay in neighborhoods they know well. Do not enter a house unless you are with an adult. Be sure to carry proper identification, your name, address, and phone number. A Halloween safety tip from your friends at Warner Hospital in Clinton. Quality care close to home.
Hear Clinton Maroon live play-by-play this season on WHOW, the big 1520 daytime, 92.3 FM in DeWitt County and 106.5 in Bloomington Normal all the time. Plus, streamed at DeWittDailyNews.com on the WHOW mobile app. Plus, hear a best of Clinton sports broadcast Saturday mornings at 10. All brought to you by Love It Once More Thrift Store. Keith Wade, your country financial representative, and our exclusive sponsor for our Player of the Game, Serve Pro of Hyatt DeWitt Counties, the leader in cleaning, restoration, and construction.
Your friend in Central Illinois, WHOW.
Once again, a good morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHOW Morning Show is streaming to Facebook and YouTube, brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton. Again, my guest on the phone today, Mrs. Cheryl Warner, is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. And Mrs. Warner, let's talk school safety and just kind of some of the ins and outs that go into these plans and execution of those plans. How about some of those things? What do you have for us today?
Right, so that is a big planning initiative for not only Macon County, but also my district in particular right now. We have some very broad range planning going in terms of a county crisis team that is all districts within Macon and Piatt County, and we are meeting on a monthly basis to create what we would consider a common reunification plan for school districts if a crisis were ever to occur. The reason this is so critical is because some of us, especially the smaller districts, do not have enough staff that if we had a crisis on our campus that would take the staff away to address that crisis, we would need to actually combine and collaborate with other districts to be able to make sure that we handled everything appropriately. So for example, Warrensburg-Latham, Rural Forsyth, and Argenta have all teamed together and we're writing one unified plan. We're identifying relocation sites together. We're touring facilities. For example, right now we're working with Life Foursquare Church so that if we ever did have to evacuate, we would all have exactly, the same plan in terms of how we would assist each other, busing, staffing, locations. So very critical. Then we kind of, take another step down and you talk about overall campus security. For us at Warrensburg-Latham, there are updates occurring with our camera systems, our PA systems, our phone systems, and then also our door access systems to provide more features for safety. We've been really fortunate. We've partnered with a company called Navigate 360, and we have collaboratively developed our emergency operation plan, which allows us to have access to everything in a mobile application, which is our safety assessments, our actual safety plans, our drill plans, our crisis flip charts, and training tools for staff, as well as our visitor management tools. So there are so many pieces to this. For example, we've got consultants coming out next week and they're doing what they call site mapping of our district, which means they'll take video and photos of every location in our campus that gets loaded into our floor plans and maps to basically assist us with any kind of crisis. And that includes mapping of where all of our cameras are, all of our fire extinguishers, all of our AEDs, anything that basically we would need, for emergency purposes. And all of this gets linked to first responders, which is a fantastic aspect of all of these programs. Companies and school districts have gotten very savvy on how we can share information quickly to try to get the support that we need in a crisis situation. One of the things that we are focusing on a lot is staff training as well. So I'm an actual Alice active shooter trainer. So I've been taking through the district the process of active shooting training. And so they've gone through all the philosophy. In November, they're going to be doing the physical practicing. And then you kind of drill down, and you start having discussions about what does this look like in a drill situation? What information do you share with students? Do they know where to go when there's an emergency? Do they know what to do? And those are all conversations happening in the classrooms. But probably one of the most critical pieces is the social emotional stability of students and making sure that we always know any student that might be struggling. And so that has been a huge initiative. And of course, we've seen students with higher needs social emotionally in the last couple of years. So lots of initiatives such as like social skills groups occurring on a regular basis with counselors, lunch groups, after school social skill training. We have our juniors and seniors are being trained in teen mental health first aid. We have our middle school teachers who do social skill morning lessons every single day. And then we have our high school, every Wednesday do a mental health check-in with every single student during their universal time. These things are critical, always taking the pulse of what's going on with the students to make sure that we can provide the services need be to try to prevent any kind of crisis situation.
You know, and among the talking points, the ways we could go out of that, Mrs. Warner, I think, you know, to kind of feed off of what you just talked about there is, you know, I think one thing maybe the pandemic has highlighted is the impact that teachers can have on a student, you know, particularly when they're away from the classroom. If they go home and they don't have the supports of a parent, you know, maybe a 2-parent household, maybe they live in a single parent household where that, you know, mom or dad is not home all the time. And so they don't get the support that maybe they should, you know, in their development of, you know, as a person. I think it highlights the impact teachers can have because they're a steady presence for a student. They're always there. And for a lot of students, maybe that's a person they can confide in when, you know, tough times come, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I mean, those teachers are a critical part of the students' lives. And we actually, at the end of November, will do what we call a social emotional survey and screening of all of our students in 4th through 12th grade. And one of the key questions we ask them is, who is the safe adult in school that they feel most comfortable sharing information or reporting to? We need to make sure that every student has one of those people, right? Also, the staff have been trained, you know, you mentioned, Seth, like what happens when they go home and there's a crisis or an emergency? It's not uncommon if a student is in crisis and they're not at school for them to reach out to a teacher through email or some other form. So our teachers have all been trained on what to do when that happens, because let's face it, crisis happens outside of the school day too. And, you know, who do teachers contact to make sure that a wellness check is occurring with the student and make sure that the parent is aware. So we've had to go through all of that training too, because you're right, the teachers are a critical portion of being that stable, you know, role model in terms of overall well-being and the, you know, the person that a student can go to in crisis.
Sure. Mrs. Warner, I look at the clock. I know you've got a meeting to get to. I'll let you get to it. Where do folks go, though, to keep up with all things Warrensburg-Latham schools?
They can go to our website at wl.k12.il.us or join our Warrensburg app through the App Store.
Mrs. Warner, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you for making time for us. That is Cheryl Warner, Superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. My guest on the phone, Network News on the way on the morning show.
WHOW.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband Paul is in the hospital after being violently assaulted by someone who broke into the couple's San Francisco home early